You know I'm totally off script right now.
Point of order.
We are traversing uncharted territory.
Listen properly.
Are we in an auction here?
We are now required to rise.
Honorable member.
Just a joke, but it's true.
I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. It's a depression.
Please, Russia, please!
It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore.
Get us Hillary Clinton's emails!
Call on all of us,
Just leave us alone.
one and all,
Well, I'm not going to leave you alone.
to play our part.
I want you to get mad.
The faith of this nation is eternal.
And my vice president has shot someone.
Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by the sun of York, and all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. Now our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarms changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures. Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled font, and now, instead of mounting barbed steeds, to fright the souls of fearful adversaries, he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber, to the lascivious pleasing of a lute. Points for who can guess.
King Henry V.
Richard III.
Oops.
Close. Shakespeare.
It was a monarch.
My name is Neil de Villiers, and if I were a Pokemon, I'd be Snorlax. He is so cuddly and dopey, and I just love him. Joining me in studio, I have raucous Rob Cass, who, if he was Japanese, would have caught them all years ago.
I would like to be Geodude. I mean, it's got dude in the name.
Radical. As well as Yemeni, Johannes Landman.
I will be Lucario. I know nothing about this character, but our awesome and in-tuned producer sent him to me and said I should choose him. I choose him.
And via the interwebs, we have apposite Andrew Park, who is...
An infamous Squirtle. And I'll leave it there. I'll let your imagination fill in the gaps.
Squirtle is also cute as hell, man. I've always loved him.
Super cute.
In this episode, we talk beer, of course, Didi Mabuza and his Russian leave of absence. We get cursed by Mogoeng Squared, and we discuss open society, whether South Africa is one, and the implications of this. Oh, let's get ready to rumble!
I liked what you did with the musical tone.
Cool.
So, on Sunday morning, I went for my standard run, and you know what I saw? A weeping willow that grows on my route, which has been barren of any life for months, has grown green shoots. I actually had to stop my run completely just to experience it. The feeling it brought over me was one of elation, of relief, but it wasn't only because the start of spring was forcing its way through old, seemingly dead branches, but because of the hint of hope it symbolized around our greater economic, social, and political situation. In thinking through this, I realized that what depressed me over the past few months has not so much been the global pandemic, as our government's inadequacy, its refusal to listen to reason, and its doubling down even in the face of hard evidence. This pulling policy from a hidden crystal ball deeply affected me. It affected how I felt about our country. It affected how I felt about my place in our society, and ultimately sent me into a downward spiral. Now, declaring my bias, and as most of you might know, I am a smoker. I have a couple of beers once or twice a week, but that's not where this is coming from. I could get beers and cigarettes during the lockdown. And it's not like I'm rushing out to go and meet 50 of my closest friends now that some of the restrictions have been lifted. We are still in the midst of a global pandemic, notwithstanding the government and the media's misdirection. On my run, my thoughts led me all over the place, and I realized that without water and sunlight, that weeping willow would die. And so too it is with our country. But what has our government done? They have centered their response to this crisis around two of the tiniest issues in our society today. This little box and this little bottle. While people line the streets in search of work, are illegally evicted from their homes or queue for hours in hopes of seeing a nurse, politicians squabble over things that mean nothing. While they steal their way into new tax brackets, our economy is crumbling, with one of the lone voices of reason, Tito Mboweni, trying to hold the door. While thousands are infected with a virus which we know nothing about and fear is rampant in our streets, Eastern Cape medical scooters are acquired at 100,000 Rand each. Multi-million Rand tenders are given to companies that were incorporated days before receiving the contracts. And corruption around life-saving protective equipment is unearthed in KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng, Eastern Cape, Mpumalanga, and the Free State. Ladies and gentlemen, I am as mad as fucking hell, and I will not take it anymore. I will no longer turn a blind eye to the homeless in our streets, nor the corruption in our government, nor our marginalized rural communities, nor the child next door not going to school. And I humbly ask that you do the same.
Amen. Motion seconded.
Nice. Someone needs to compose some strings to put behind that. It was very, very moving.
I think it was very moving on its own.
Yeah, shit, man. Sometimes you feel a bit stuck with the anger, huh?
And you know, it's not. I know that took like a very negative bent, and I'm not actually negative, but the kind of like the symbolization of Cyril lifting the bands on Saturday night and then seeing that tree. And it was just the realization that actually, like, I can deal with the pandemic. I can deal with all the other crap happening in my life, the loss of income, all of that shit. But what I can't deal with is a government that just fucking does whatever they want, you know? I am hopeful, like I said, but it just made me angry. Like, how dare you send so many people into this same spiral, you know? And I know a lot of people have felt the same. Sure, we're dealing with a pandemic. Sure, we're not in an ideal situation to be dealing with that pandemic in a third world country, sure. And things are difficult and we're gonna have to stick together and force it through, you know?
Yeah.
But just the realization that actually what has been weighing on my mind like a blanket has been the government's lack of communication, lack of clarity.
And I mean, I think one of the most shocking things is the lack of consultation with the public and the blatant lack of consultation. The fact that they've even gone so far as to say, we don't need to consult.
That was NDZ. And it was just like, what, you don't need to consult with the public? You don't need to consult with private enterprise? Well then, Heineken, SAB consult, cheers, guys, cheers, we're hot.
And it's the attitude, I think that the most amusing thing for me is that, yeah, maybe legally speaking, you don't have to. But that's not the point.
Exactly.
Like, the whole point is that you as a governor, as a governing body,
You
if you
as
want
an
to look at that way,
elected representative of the people.
That's even
it's the right thing to do. That's what you should be doing. That's what you should want to do.
And you know, you look at places like New Zealand. My friends emigrated to New Zealand 3 years ago. The comparisons between the two countries are difficult. I understand all the complexities of the comparisons between the two countries. But you kind of start thinking like, what if the last 20 years, every centimeter of or every second of effort that was spent pulling the same way, was spent pulling forward? What if that? Would we be in a different situation? No, of course we would. And I think it also kind of drove home the greater point of this podcast to me, you know, that they might have seen the error in their ways and kind of done a U-turn on it. But it falls to people to keep those governing officials to account.
And referencing previous podcasts on the topic of electoral reform, you don't do that only at the voting ballot box every 4 years. You do that through engagement.
So I'd like to speculate on something. Our vice president, David Didi Mabuza. No one's seen or heard from him in quite a while now.
Really?
I've never heard that name in my entire life.
So, Mr. Vice President hasn't been available to answer questions in Parliament or virtual Parliament, which it is now, for his last 2 sessions that he was supposed to. And he was supposed to answer yesterday and I think today as well, and said no, he's too ill. He was too ill the previous time he was supposed to answer, and he's too ill still. And they said, no, he's not bedridden. He's okay, but his medical team have recommended that he can't answer questions on a Zoom call or whatever. Yeah,
From his hospital bed.
From his home where he's
or his
recovering.
wingback by the fire.
But he was poisoned, I think, about 3 or 4 years ago, supposedly poisoned. And since then, he's had to regularly go to Russia for medical treatment.
Oh my gosh!
And I just like to speculate on what disease could you have that you have to regularly go all the way to Russia for treatment? I mean, we have some of the best private healthcare in this country that he has access to. What does he need to go all the way to Russia for regularly to be treated for?
If memory serves, Rob, it was even before COVID that he was supposedly bedridden. So it's been 6 months.
A while, yeah.
It's been over 6 months.
I mean,
almost.
they said that they looked at his official diary, and it's something ridiculous. Like 35% of his time isn't accounted for. Like there's just he's just not
doing a new
very well.
Russian nuclear deal. Dude.
Yeah, there's like I think in his official diary, there's like 30% of his time that he's actually doing work for the state. There's quite a bit of time that he's doing work for the ANC, which he's not really supposed to be doing, and the rest of it they just can't account for. And sure, maybe you could make the argument that that's his official diary and probably gets involved in a lot of things and.
Yeah, a lot of things that can't go in his diary. Yeah.
No, I mean, you know, there's probably a lot of things that come up on a daily basis. You would imagine that the second in charge of the country. But
I won't.
If the person under discussion, sorry, Joe, was David Potter, I'd say yes. If the person under discussion is Didi Mabuza, I'd say probably no. But I think it's interesting because it talks about it talks about the power relationship in the ANC, you know, and the thing that I want to kind of float there is that Cyril actually gave the biggest hospital pass to Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma during this time. He stood up and said, we're going to make cigarettes and alcohol legal. And then she had to stand up and say that, no, cigarettes are actually not legal. And kind of, he's kind of mortgaged her political future beyond retribution by doing that. And I feel like, I mean, this might be a conspiracy theory, but it is my theory, that he's playing the long game here, you know.
He's undoubtedly made her public enemy number one. I mean, people are angry at Cyril. People are beyond anger. They are overwhelmed, livid with NDZ, more so even than Ace Magashule.
Yeah.
No doubt Ace will do something wrong soon, and they'll, but agreed.
Yeah, but I mean, Ace is pretty much on the verge of being arrested.
He's in the crosshairs, that's for sure.
And Didi Mabuza is nowhere to be found. I mean, is there anyone else that's powerful in the ANC?
Well, there's the top six. So we've just taken. I think the arrest of Ace is a longer game than. But I take you for our listeners this week. 3 more people in the Estina Dairy fiasco were arrested by the Hawks, and the point is that they are the 3rd level of management. So the Hawks are working their way up. They've caught these 3. These 3 are 1 level away from Mosebane Zwane, who is 1 level away from Ace Magashule in the value chain of, well, value is an interesting description of that chain. In the downward rolling things that roll downhill, in that hierarchy at the time that Ace was provincial premier.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's him. That's 1. 2 was the deputy president. So who does that leave us with? The president, Gwedi Mantashe, who is secretary. He's not SG of the ANC anymore. He's now.
Oh, I'm not sure.
He's chairman.
Yeah.
So there's Gwedi. There's Paul Mashatile, who's treasurer. And I'm missing a 4th person.
But can
There's still Jesse Duarte, who's still...
There we go. Now, the point is this. The top 6 was split 3 each.
Yeah.
If you take 2 of the bad guys out, you've got Jesse left, who hasn't really done much on the public stage in years.
Jesse's a kite. She just goes with the wind.
Yeah. I'll come back to Jesse. But to answer your question in a very long way, Neil, maybe we'll try that again.
No.
To answer your question, of the top 6, 3 were evil and 3 were good.
Yes.
And if your prediction plays out, you neutralize 2 of them.
2 of them, yeah. And I mean, I just don't think, I'm not sure that there's anyone else that can garner the support of that faction. I mean, they could just push someone up there, obviously, but I just can't see it on a national
and
level.
to reinforce your point, who did garner the support of that faction last time, who's not on the top 6 list? NDZ. And he's just made her political capital absolutely nil, if not negative.
Yeah.
I'll say.
Yeah.
Shame, man. Let's spare a thought for Jacob Zuma. He's probably finding it really difficult to fill up his weekly poker game.
Dude, I've been sitting through hours of Zooming with the Zoomers. I'm going to do
That explains why you're feeling so terrible. No, come on.
Grief,
You
man.
can't drink a
I'm
quarter
gonna-
can
Don't do
of
that to
venomous
yourself.
piss every night and then
Don't
be
do it.
upset when you need to spend the day barfing your lungs out. No, crisis, man.
Well, Joe, that never stopped you, my friend.
I have not watched Zooming with the Zoomers ever.
No, but you drink too much wine.
No, but that's not venomous. No. I object to your comparison, sir. Most strenuously.
But then I've lost my point completely.
Of course.
There's an ad hominem fucking attack there, man.
So, if I may bring us back to our proposed episode plan, I think we now have to ask you, Andrew, what you would like to tell us as a tidbit for the week.
Yes, well, my story stars our Chief Justice, Mogoeng, also known as Mogoeng Squared, or simply Mogoeng, if you happen to be on first name terms. Up until recently, I've had a fairly high opinion of the man, but a few weeks ago he made some worrying comments. What he said is that South Africa should not distance itself from Israel in response to Israeli war crimes and other human rights violations, and that doing so can only attract unprecedented curses upon our nation. Foreboding stuff. You've probably heard that the Israel-Palestine conflict is all about religion, goes back thousands of years, and is generally not a topic for polite conversation. Most of this is bollocks. And here are a few bare facts. By international law, Israel and Palestine are two separate countries. According to the Israeli government, Palestine rightfully belongs to Israel. Palestinians disagree. What's the situation on the ground? Israel occupies Palestine with its military and private security and has all of the power. It is nowhere near a symmetrical conflict. The occupation comes with all kinds of human rights violations, like limiting access to water and electricity, trying children in military courts, bulldozing houses, shooting medics at peaceful protests, the works. And they haven't stopped now. They're not at a truce or anything. Israel continues to expand by establishing Jewish settlements inside Palestine, and they've been getting more and more aggressive since Trump came into office. Okay, so clearly the government doesn't have any kind of intention to negotiate. We're not looking at like a hear both sides kind of situation, really. We're a bit beyond that. And that's pretty much the sum of it. No need to invoke religion or ancient history, unless you somehow can't tell the difference between the US-controlled government of modern-day Israel and a crowd of desert wanderers from a 5,000-year-old Bible story. In which case, it seems you're in rather auspicious company. So Mogoeng has been a bit unfair on Palestine, but that's hardly a crime. However, Africa for Palestine is taking him to court over a past court case in which his views on Israel may have affected his decisions, so he may have been biased in light of this.
Sorry, can we just
They
take a
say
step back?
Yeah.
There is a public benefit organization or an NGO that is taking the Chief Justice of its own country to court.
Ties in so nicely with what we're going to
love
talk
my
about.
country so much.
Ties in so nicely with what we're going to talk
Right.
about.
It's beautiful. So anyway, they've found a way to take him to court for this. Not that it's sneaky or anything. That's a fair point. He may have been biased in these former cases. So anyway, the Chief Justice's response to this claim is not the kind of thoughtful, sober reflection you might have hoped for. I did a rough count. In the 19-page response, there are about 15 references to legislation. Some of them are repeated. And there are also references to the Bible, 39 of those. Okay, 15 to legislation or legal documents, 39 to the Bible. If you change the word Bible to Quran, it could quite easily be mistaken for the ramblings of an egomaniacal Ayatollah. Let me treat you to the first sentence as a warm-up. I am a citizen of South Africa, a Christian who believes the Bible in its totality, and have since the 8th of September 2011 been privileged to serve the Republic as Chief Justice. From here, it reads as if he ate deep-fried Bible for dinner, shat the bed overnight, and couriered his sheets to the judge for cleaning in the morning. I've selected some of the meatier nuggets to share with you.
Meteor nuggets!
You're welcome. All right. First, ordering one's affairs in line with the Holy Bible is a fundamental right. So, presumably, he'd be appalled if Israel was limiting Palestinian access to Bibles rather than water and electricity. 2. The mystery behind this word of God is that it is Jesus Christ himself. Jesus is the Bible. Interesting bit of jurisprudence there. I guess that's why he makes the big bucks and I don't. 3. Those who are planning or conspiring to destroy or kill me, I forgive them. Right? Okay. Easier said when you're not in danger of being maimed by snipers during a peaceful protest, but very generous nonetheless. Thank you, Chief Justice. So, how do we explain this breakfast unfit for a dog? Is the CJ's dealer cutting his cocaine with powdered Bibles? Or could it be that there is simply no good argument not to stand up for the people of Palestine? If you'd like to support Africa for Palestine, they used to be called BDS South Africa. B for boy, D for dog, S for sister, bdssouthafrica.com. Otherwise, you can search Africa for Palestine on social media. They would very much appreciate your support.
Everyone expected Mogoeng to be a Zuma man through and through, and actually he's come up for the boys and girls of this country for quite a few times. So I think it's valid. Just mentioning that, like overzealous religiosity put aside. And just for our listeners, I'd like to point out that even though it doesn't sound like it, Mr. Park, at least insofar as I remember, is a Christian. So just coming from that point of view, Andrew is not an atheist saying these things, and I think that's valid to mention too.
That's very useful context.
I know you didn't know that, Joe.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
I found that useful context. I would make another point. I mean, firstly, Neil, thanks for making that point. It's an important one. I almost want to forgive our Chief Justice whatever his views are because he's done a lot for our country. But the second point is to live in South Africa is to live with ambiguity. Here is a man who has done a great deal for the boys and girls of our country and has some absolutely, you could say, ludicrous or questionable, certainly radical ideas. And it is possible for one individual to hold both. It's not always easy for us to deal with that reality, but it would seem that is the reality.
I guess the concern is that, if they've raised this case against how that has affected his judgment, that becomes very problematic, in that South Africa is a secular society. And if he allows religious influence to influence his decisions, that is massively problematic.
Agreed. And, to the topic of our later main discussion, here is an open society group that is testing that.
I love it. I absolutely love it. We've seen that, like, a lot of people or some people in the ANC, some very prominent people that I can't name one of now, have come out in support of Israel. And I remember I was living in Cape Town for quite a bit of this, and every weekend there would be Palestinian and Israeli marches on Ruland Street towards Parliament. And actually it was mostly really civil and peaceful, and these people would actually sit there and talk to each other, whether it was 1,000 of them or 20 of them. And I'd see them often, and that's another beauty of an open society.
But the reason Israel looks like it does is because they couldn't achieve the miracle South Africa did. A miracle that Neil just related, seeing on Ruland Street. Two completely opposite factions with massively differing views on everything could sit down and talk to each other. We achieved that here, they can't.
Well, we achieved it when apartheid lost the support of the US. Israel has maintained the support of the US.
And that's a massive problem.
That's it, if you ask me.
You were talking about the kind of security companies and whatever, and actually it's just proxy, like you mentioned at the end of your thing, which is hugely problematic for the entire region.
So I do, Andrew, I just need to put on record that I fundamentally disagree with your statement. I think the US support is certainly a factor, but what was achieved in this country was truly a miracle driven by the people of this country. not strictly by
And
censorship.
I would like to take this opportunity to pull out the tangent gavel at this early juncture.
Yes, the gavel is heard.
Okay.
I think we're making a lot of good points, but I think we're talking about something that deserves about 3 or 4 shows on its own.
No, sure.
Very
But
good. Where do we
I
go
think it
next?
was, I think
Write
it
it
was
down.
rolling.
Someone
It was
write
nice.
that down.
It's going into season 2's episode plan.
Okay, so that was Andrew, and that brings us anything but neatly to our main topic. Rob Cass, Johannes Landman, take it away.
All right, so today we're going to be talking about the Open Society, and we've actually made a lot of references to it already, which has been a nice build-up to what our main topic is today. And I think a good place to start is, what is an open society? I mean, we've made, as I said, cursory references to things that we're allowed to do because we're an open society. But I think there's a lot of value in saying, well, what does this actually mean, this term? And I was reading an interesting paper referencing the legal basis for the Open Society, the way it's tied into the legal framework in South Africa. And there were some great defining points, and I'm just going to go through those quickly. The first is obviously freedom. I think that's the first thing people connect with an open society. And freedom can mean many different things, obviously. The way it was described here is firstly autonomy, the freedom to make your own choices, even if that's to your own detriment. And I think that actually ties in interestingly to the conversations that we've been having about cigarettes and alcohol.
Definitely.
You know, the fact that, sure, maybe it's not good for you, but as long as you're prepared to pay the price that you put on, the cost that you put onto the government, you should be allowed to do whatever you want to do. The fact that it doesn't preclude religion or tradition, but it makes the distinction between forced adherence to something and a chosen adherence to something.
Yes.
So that freedom to practice your religion, but not a state-mandated religion.
Yes, but also, sorry, Rob, if I could just interject. The way they say it in the report was, it's not the antithesis of tradition, but rather the antithesis of blind adherence to tradition.
And there's more references to that. So one of the other ones is let's call it the second one, is rationality and rational criticism, and that ties in with what you were saying. So that's questioning the norms, questioning the laws and their applicability and their continued applicability. And I think that's vitally important. How many things, I think America is a good example of this. Certain things that made a lot of sense when the Constitution of the US was formed don't necessarily make a lot of sense in modern context. And it's very difficult for a society to change that, even an open society. But it is one of the things that we should value. And I think in South Africa, for instance, when we do look at making changes to the Constitution, for instance, when we were talking about electoral reform, looking at things that are part of the fundamental fabric of our society and questioning them rationally, that's part of what an open society is.
If I could just underline something, because we'll come back to it later. What strikes there is the concept that your society is rational in its criticism. And we'll come back to that, I think.
So the third point is humaneness. And that relates to valuing individuals in their own right, rather than their benefit to the state. And I think, quite a lot of the kind of rhetoric that you see in movies around the Soviets, a lot of what we get is that kind of idea that your value lay in what you could offer to the state, to Mother Russia.
Yes.
And this talks to your value being something that is implicit. It's just you have value as a human being, not in your contribution to the society, not in dying for the society.
It's a collectivist interpretation versus the individual interpretation.
And the final point is individual responsibility. And that is each person's responsibility to hold up the 3 other factors that I talked about.
Could you give me those 4 factors again?
So the first one is freedom.
Yeah.
Second one was rationality. Third one was humaneness. And finally, individual responsibility.
Thank you.
There were 2 quotes that I would really love to say from that same paper that you sent us, Rob. And the one, it's a paper by Popper, and we'll link it in the show notes. But just tying into the kind of definition, firstly, it is the longing of uncounted, unknown men and women to free themselves and their minds from the tutelage of authority and prejudice. It is their attempt to build up an open society which rejects the absolute authority of the merely established and the merely traditional, while trying to preserve, to develop, and to establish traditions, old or new, that measure up to their standards of freedom, humaneness, and rational criticism.
Amen.
So that's the one. And then, sorry, if you'll allow me,
Stop
I might,
apologizing
I
for
might,
quoting great stuff. Go.
I might cut this out. On the rationality and the kind of assessing of society and its norms, there's a judgment that they quote, and they say, the antiquity of a prejudice is no reason for its survival. Slavery lasted for a century and a half in this country, talking about America. Colonialism for twice as long. The prohibition of interracial marriages for even longer. And overt male domination for millennia. All were based on apparently self-evident biological and social facts. All were once sanctioned by religion and imposed by law. The first two today are regarded with total disdain, and the third with varying degrees of denial, shame, or embarrassment. And just my last point is that it's so amazing to talk about this stuff after our conversation last week with Nontle. Andrew mentioned in the first Civic Life episode that most people just care whether the kid next door goes to school. I mentioned it in my morning rant as well. This ties in with that humanist concept. We've spoken at length about personal freedoms and how the state has affected those in South Africa, especially recently. And finally, we have tried to engage and challenge our norms, but more so, that culture, Nontle and the Amadiba Crisis Committee, they have kept those parts of their culture that, like she said, tied her to their land and reassessed other parts of their culture.
Well, what I'm hearing, if I can try, is this concept of antiquity and interrogating it rationally. And those beliefs, truths, structures, societal norms that serve us, we retain. And those that do not, we dismiss or we improve upon.
More or less.
I think your point also speaks to what I was saying about historical perspective and how Nontle was saying, they remember their culture and the values of their culture, and knowing that your values or your ways came from somewhere and actually, aren't these immutable laws or anything, helps you put it in that perspective and realize that they are things that can change. They are things that by nature change. If they didn't change, they would, never have come to be in the first place.
And your society would stagnate.
You see from that perspective that cultures can go in different directions, and some directions, let's be honest, are better than others.
For sure.
Why shouldn't we be guiding our society and culture according to our values?
I'd like to bring our discussion of the concept of an open society home to SA. And Rob, you've opened the door for me there by quoting the academic paper you sent around, which speaks about the preamble to the South African Constitution and mentions that the concept of an open society, quote unquote, is mentioned not only in the preamble, but in the Constitution itself on multiple occasions.
Sorry, Joe. I saw, obviously that legal definition, and it's very interesting to see it from that point of view, because that guy talks about a democratic and open society, and he says that most of the focus is actually on democratic, the democratic part of the statement, not on its ugly twin sister, the open society.
Whereas in the phrase, they're supposed to be equal.
Exactly. And
Equally
it's so interesting, actually, just to get into a lawyer's mind for a little bit, to see such a visceral kind of definition given by a field like that. But I went on to the Open Society Foundation, something that we're going to talk a lot about, and they have this video that's cut with people like Kofi Annan, ex-leaders of the UN, leaders in all fields of kind of open society and civil society and whatever. And they cut this video, and I just thought it might be nice to mention what they say. So they say an open society is a society in which everyone's full potential as a human being is realized. A belief in the right of every individual to have certain levels of dignity, including freedom. The freedom of expression, the freedom of assembly and association, the freedom of movement, freedom to protest, voting rights, a free judiciary, equal justice and transparency and fairness, a government that is held accountable by its people. And at the very heart of the idea of open society is that people can disagree, but they can still recognize the greater goal of being able to live in mutual respect and in peace.
Oh, that is poetry.
But I don't know if I want poetry, actually, when it comes to definitions.
Andrew wants a war.
You know,
So,
if
Andrew
I
Lottie, will you not join me in
if
being
every
a
time I
warrior
opened a
poet?
dictionary I got poetry, I'd be fucking annoyed, right? You want to understand what a word means when you read a definition.
I mean, I think it's a difficult thing to kind of define, and this is obviously like marketing for the Open Society Foundation. You know, they went and found all these people, sent camera crews all over the world, and to get these quotes from them, because it's kind of difficult to define it. I mean, if you go and look on Google, it's not really like this is an open society. There it is, boom. And I think that's a part of the reason. But so you're saying you don't want poetry, you want math, Andrew?
I don't know about maths, but I don't feel like I feel more confused about what an open society is. So maybe let me put the question this way. What would a society look like that was very democratic, but not very open?
So one of the freedoms required for an open society is the ability to change your government. And I'm not sure that a non-democratic society allows for that. I'm hypothesizing here.
There are obviously non-democratic societies. Wait, are there?
That are
I mean,
open, question mark.
Is China? No.
China fails.
Definitely
Russia
not.
fails.
Russia has
Russia
independent media.
Russia
There's just
fucking fails.
There's just no independent thought.
No, but I think Andrew's saying the opposite, which I think is valid, and saying
Yes.
that if you are arguing that, you know, for something to be democratic, it must be open.
Yes.
And maybe those are one and the same.
No, sorry, I was just trying to triangulate by doing the reverse and trying to come to a. But it's
So
difficult.
it might be open without being democratic necessarily.
Yes.
You can have a degree of openness without
And
democracy.
that is what China is, a degree of openness.
Forgive me, guys. I'm going to quote you some stuff just now. Like China is a closed society, full stop.
No,
Point one. Point two, what we're trying to do, and there I'm with you, is define an open society. And Andrew, to your point, that definition is quite hard to come by, and poetry doesn't help. What I'm putting forward is that one of the defining parts of an open society is the freedom to change one's government. And thus, absence of freedom to change government equals absence of democracy, equals, I think, absence of a truly open society. And I mean, we're struggling to come up with an example of something, a monarchy or a single party state that is open, I think. So let's just try and take this definition concept together. Rob, you gave us 5 words. I'm going to ask you to give them to us again.
4 words: freedom, humaneness, rationality, and 5 words: individual responsibility.
Okay. Neil, you gave us some concepts there. Do you want to try and hit
Everyone's
4
full potential as a human being being realized. Expression, assembly, movement, protest, voting rights, judiciary, equal justice, transparency, and fairness, a government that is held accountable by its people, and the idea that people can disagree, but they still recognize the greater goal of being able to live in mutual respect and in peace.
Andrew, how's that stacking up as a description of sorts or as a framework?
I just started off with poetry, so now now everything I say is poetic, and Andrew's unhappy.
No, I feel like I'm getting it. It's kind of like the freedom to be an individual, or having intrinsic value as an individual, and
No.
yeah,
agreed.
I get
I'm also
that.
on
the
a
rights that
learning
come
journey
it.
with you, so agreed.
I think all of us are on a learning journey here.
I put down a few practical pillars. So I'm not defining an open society. I put down pillars of what it needs. And George Soros, the founder of the Open Society Foundation, has written this in a book. There are 9 of them. My father has written it down, but he's in the Voltaire and his book is in the library, and so we couldn't bring the two together. I will report back at our next
the nine pillars.
He says it's 9 or 7, and he might just be sticking to the prime number because it's sexy.
I see.
The pillars I'd put on the table are an independent judiciary, independent news media, civic organizations, civic involvement, the ability to change your government, and accountability by the public that can lead to at least a public outcry or a pushback. But pillars aside, I'm unfortunately going to bring some more poetry to the table, if I may, and then I've got data. But poetry first, then data. The poetry I found is in the legal article that Rob gave us to look at, which Neil quoted from in the article quoting Karl Popper. Karl Popper. It mentioned
Popper.
that Popper. It mentioned that the Constitution, not only in its preamble but in the document, uses the words "an open society" multiple times. And then I found myself quite aghast, my fellow listeners or dear listeners, to realize that I have never read the preamble to our Constitution. So you can find it on Google. It's pretty quick. And just hear these 7 or 8 lines. We, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustices of our past. Reflect on that line for a moment and when this thing was written. Recognize the injustices of our past. Honor those who suffered for justice and freedom in our land. Respect those who have worked to build and develop our country. And believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity, which is what Neil brought up just now. We therefore, through our freely elected representatives, adopt this Constitution as supreme rule of law, so as to heal the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. Lay the foundations for a democratic and open society in which government is based on the will of the people and every citizen is equally protected by law. Improve the quality of life of all citizens and free the potential of each person, so to build a united and democratic South Africa able to take its rightful place as a sovereign state in the family of nations. May God protect our people. Nkosi sikelele Afrika. Mduzimu fatushetsa Afrika.
It's beautiful. It's really beautiful.
This is like our document.
But
Celebrate it.
What I want to say is, I want to quote Andrew, and if we want that, we've got to take up the job. This is our job. This is everyone's job. You know, it's not going to happen on its own.
But that's why one of the things that were quoted was the individual responsibility of each person to uphold these values.
Exactly. Yeah, I just want to like drive it home, you know, because it really, like, these documents, you can understand the words and whatever, but does that actually mean that you're going to get involved?
So someone who agrees with you and used to work with Chief Justice Mogoeng is retired Justice Edwin Cameron. You may remember this quote from a previous show, but I'm going to throw it at you again. The Constitution itself cannot save South Africa from crime, corruption, misgovernance, governmental inefficiency, and police brutality. What can save South Africa is, to Neil's point, the Constitution in combination with a proud, deeply skeptical population and principled lawyering.
Guys, I need some numbers. Joe, throw some numbers at us.
Okay.
Give us the data.
Ladies and gentlemen, now the data. There is a fantastic outfit called Civicus or Civic US. They have not much to do with the US except that they get money from US NGOs, so please don't judge them on their name. What they do is they rate countries around the world in 5 categories. Open and narrow are the first 2. They are green. Obstructed is yellow, repressed is orange, and closed is down at the bottom of the list, red.
Wait, hold on. Open and narrow.
Open, second tier narrow, then obstructed, then repressed, then closed. So narrow sounds, I also didn't like it
sounds
much.
like at the bottom.
It sounds like
but it's second from the top.
But it's second from the top.
Okay.
And open and narrow are both green. In
So
fact,
narrowly open is what they say.
yeah,
So
I
that's
suppose.
So it actually shows how much you go down in the levels as you go. You go from really open to narrowly open.
Touche. To obstructed.
Yes.
In other words, there's nothing open, you can barely get through. To repressed, you can't not get through. You get someone sitting on you. To closed, go away. Do not pass go. Now, what's interesting is they look at countries.
Enough about your sex life, though.
What sex life, Andrew? What sex life, dude?
So, I'm going to throw you the number of countries per category. There are 43 countries in the world which they rate as open. Guess the percentage of people, of global population that live in those 43 countries. I'll help you. The total of the 5 percentages have to add up to 100.
If we take China out of it, that's a 1/6 of the world's population. Okay, so we can just start there. That's bottom level. I take it.
It is, and perhaps to help you and the listeners, I'm just going to rattle off the numbers per category, just so you get a feeling. They go 43 countries, then 42, then 49, then 38, then 24. So 43 is a fairly big number of the total.
Yes.
Okay.
So what was the question? sir?
What percentage of global population live in open countries, in those 43 open countries?
So I would say India's probably narrow, if I had to guess. So that's like another sixth of the 20%.
I've got 20, Mr. Cass.
Yeah, I was going to go around that
I've
as
got
well.
a second 20, Mr. Park.
I'll say 30.
30. Ladies and gentlemen, the number is 3. 3% of the world's population live in open societies. The second
That's
category,
what I
which
get
is
for trying to be an
narrow.
optimist.
Say again.
That's what I get for my optimism.
The second category, which is narrow, has 42 countries, placed the 43 previously. Anyone want to give me a guess of what percentage of the world's population lives in narrow countries?
I'm taking a cue from the South African government and doubling down on 20%.
Love it, love it. We have a double down to 20. What else have we got?
Raise your bets. No, I'm gonna reassess my stance and go 10.
I've got 10 and I've got 20, Mr. Park.
I will take 30 again.
30
Double me
again.
down.
We've got 2 double downs. The number is 13, 1, 3.
Oh yes, get in, boy.
Now the point I want to make by that little numerical game of bingo is only 17% of the people on this planet live in a country which is either open or narrowly open. 87% of the people on Earth live in closed or repressed societies. That's a pretty refreshing data point. All right,
Especially
but,
because of the next one.
well,
Are you going to tell us where South Africa is?
who wants to guess? So I'll give you the 5 categories again. The very top one, well, I mean, really, it's closed, open, or somewhere in between.
Top, open,
I hear open from Neil.
first.
We just spoke ill
Narrow.
of the vice president of this country and no one's bushed through the door yet, so I'm going to go with open.
Andrew, are you going to be optimistic or are you going to stick your cynic bent?
I'll take things a little cynical and say narrow.
Okay.
The winner, ladies and gentlemen, is Andrew Park. South Africa has great company in the category of narrow. People who are there with us are Neil's favorite, the United States, Namibia, the United Kingdom, Australia, Argentina, Chile, Ghana, Ecuador, Japan, Bulgaria, Italy, Spain, and Greece. That's quite a diverse basket. And I'm going to color it in by giving you a couple of countries that are open. Remember, there are 42 of them, but they only account for 3% of the Earth's population. Norway, the Czech Republic, Finland, Sweden, Lithuania, Estonia.
I knew that the Nordic countries in
Bingo.
Europe were going to be right.
And then
at
if
the
there's
top.
one
They're
Central European...
they're the oaks making the flipping law, the laws, doing these things.
Lithuania and Estonia.
And Estonia. And I'm so glad you picked up on that. These oaks came out of the USSR.
yeah,
I mean, big
yeah.
up to them. Then, does anyone want to guess which 2 Central European countries win for open society?
Deutschland,
Correct. And they make clocks and chocolates.
Switzerland.
Correct. As well
So are they
as...
at the?
They're open.
Oh, they also.
They're
okay.
open. And only one North American country, well, one American country, and that is Canada.
It's better to say North American because everyone in South America
suppose.
gets quite
Very
pissed
upset.
off when you say
it's just you give it
America.
away if you've already mentioned the United States. There
Yes,
are
yeah. Well, there's a lot. Joe.
Northern American.
Mexico, Nicaragua, Honduras.
Are those
This
North
is
American, not
all
Central
North-
American?
All North American. Panama.
I apologize to our listeners from those countries. I look forward to you hearing our podcast. My point, I threw
Email
a lot
us
of
your
data.
rage at letstalkpodcast@gmail.com.
Specifically directed at
Yeah, the
Joe.
big debate. Is it North America? Central America? Where is Panama? Let us know. Have your say.
Where in the world is Panama?
My point really just is 17% of populations have what we have. And what we have is pretty damn unique. And I'll give you the definition of narrow
Thank you.
just in pieces quickly. The state allows individuals and civil society organizations to exercise their rights to freedom of association, peaceful assembly, and expression. Violations of these rights also take place. People can
So
form
that's the difference between open and narrow would be that little bit
No,
there.
this is the definition of narrow.
Okay.
So you have the stuff, but you have some violations thereof.
Yes, yeah. So if in an open society you would just have the stuff.
Correct.
There's not
There would not be some violation
Yes,
thereof.
yeah, exactly.
And I think it's great that we drill into the detail because we forget what we have in this country. And I'm going to read you one more from narrow, then I'm going to read you the definition, not even for closed, just for repressed. Just go with me here. In narrow, protests are conducted peacefully. Neil mentioned people walking down Rilland Street from completely opposing views and talking to each other. Protests are conducted peacefully, although authorities sometimes deny permissions, use excessive force, which may include tear gas and rubber bullets. That stuff will happen in a narrowly open society, but we're still open. Compare this to the 40% of people on the planet who live in repressed societies. Civic space is severely constrained. Active individuals and civil society members who criticize power holders risk surveillance, harassment, intimidation, imprisonment, injury, and death. And then let me give you the opening line.
That's what happens if you try and speak out about
David
Scientology.
Mabuza
Scientology in the Utah.
and then here is the opening line of a closed. Here is the first line of the definition of a closed society. There is complete closure in law and in practice of civic space. An atmosphere of fear and violence prevails. Let's just take a moment to get some context.
Can you give us some examples, Joe? So
Yeah.
China, closed.
80% of the world. That one's 80%.
No. That was the last one.
Right.
That
That was
was
the last
closed.
one, which is
That was
24
closed.
countries making up 27%.
Let's see how many we can get.
Okay.
China, Russia,
I don't
North
have the map
Korea.
in front of me. Hold on. We're going to have to re-record this.
No, it's fine.
go.
Let's try. China, Russia, North Korea, Belarus. Anyone?
Brazil, India, Pakistan.
You would say
Philippines.
you would say India is closed all the way at the bottom. I wouldn't say so. Definitely not.
Maybe not.
Not in the same company as China. No, I think they probably maybe narrow, maybe one level lower. I think. Rob, any ideas?
Possibly like Myanmar,
Yeah.
Burma, whatever you want to call them,
Venezuela, probably.
Venezuela.
Okay, I'll hit you with a list. China, Turkmenistan, Iran, Egypt, Libya, Sudan, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, South Sudan.
Ah, Yemeni Johannes Landman.
Yo, vet foot in the first black. Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Cayman Islands. Cuba. I can't give you much more than that. That's
Oh,
what my map
you're like
was.
on an interactive map.
I'm on
Okay.
an interactive map.
Okay.
On a
So
small
Russia
little
isn't
tangent.
there, Joe.
See.
Russia,
And
according to
UAE?
these guys, is repressed, which is second from the bottom.
Okay, and Venezuela.
Venezuela, now you are asking, there we go. Repressed. Colombia repressed. What else you got for me?
Myanmar.
Shout out to the Guptas, UAE.
Especially after my big fuck you to them last week.
Did you see the wedding video?
I didn't. Of the one that we're
Tony's daughter got married. I think his son or his daughter, and it was incredible.
Of
They had
course.
this 5-day wedding without tax money that was just. It was
something to
it was
behold
stunning.
via
It warmed
the
my heart.
online stream. What did Jay-Z
me
join
tell you.
virtually? Hey, did they put a little laptop or an iPad on a stand for him there? I mean, he must have been the guest of fucking honor, in fact.
The
And
answer
David
is
Mabuza
repressed.
from his hospital bed in Russia.
He wasn't too ill for that. The answer is repressed on both counts. If for the purpose of our listeners, I propose we roll gently
Yes,
forward.
let's move on.
The question we wanted to cover, the listeners, was...
Sorry, Rob, you had a tangent.
You had a tangent.
Okay.
No? Rob is worried about his own gavel being used against him.
I'm stopping myself here.
Just to kind of bring us back onto what we're constructing as an argument. First, we attempted to define an open society. We gave you listeners some things there. Then we said, how does South Africa compare? And according to this data, I would argue the answer is really well. And we would do well to remember
Fourth
that.
out of 5 ain't bad, bro. Seriously,
Well,
I'm being serious.
what do you mean by fourth out of
Fifth or second?
second?
Second out of 5.
Yeah, second.
However,
And we're in that top 17%. We are narrowly open, but we're open.
I was actually referring to a Meatloaf song, Giannis. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. So that's why I went backwards, man. Come on, pick
Neil,
up.
I would do anything for love. If life was a lemon, I would want one.
Thanks.
One of the things that struck me in the definition, it said that you have all these theoretical things in place. So we have a constitution that guarantees this level of openness. And we have a lot of the law guarantees that level of openness for us. But the practice doesn't necessarily meet up with the theory. And that is kind of the definition of what's going on in South Africa, where we have all the protections, all the laws available to us. It's just the application of it. Yeah, so that kind of sums it up for me in South Africa's position on that. We could so easily be right in that top bracket if we just followed our own rules.
But we could also, I mean, we could just as easily be Ghana, Rob, where they fucking lynching gay and lesbian people in the streets, you know?
And
I mean, I'm exaggerating. I know I'm
No,
exaggerating.
you're not exaggerating.
Well, it is, they'd lock them up and then lynch them behind closed doors. But I am exaggerating.
They pull them
but
off the streets first.
Yeah, no,
Please.
like
They
put a
got some
curtain
manners.
in front of it at least, man. Come on.
It's a private lynching. No
But we
more
could
than
have
50
we
people.
could have very easily been that. And speaking about the kind of religiosity of someone like Mogoeng, we could have very easily gone all the way the other way, you know, with like regressive laws and stuff like that. And I think it's worth mentioning that our constitution is one of the most progressive constitutions in the world.
I'd like to add two things to that for us and for our listeners. Firstly, let's remind ourselves that the Republic of South Africa is 26 years old and probably has in its recent memory, more recent than world wars or depressions, some of the most incredibly violent and horrifying interhuman conflict this world has seen outside of wartime. And 26 years into a new government where the repressed have taken over, we've managed to not be in the bottom three categories that are all closed. We aren't at the top, but hell, we're in that 13%. And I think we can be very glad as a fledgling democracy with our history that we've pulled that off. The second point Rob made, listeners, was he feels that the law's there and the poetry is there, but maybe the practice isn't. And I'm going to challenge you, Mr. Cass, to talk to us about some of the practice that we've read up about in SA civil society and SA open society. And let's unpack that a bit.
So yeah, I mean, in South Africa, we are fortunate that we have a lot of civil society organizations which ensure that government sticks to the constitution and sticks to the principles of an open society. And I think, you know, we can talk about, there's so many of them, but some of the main success stories, and I think the one I always like to come back to is the Treatment Action Campaign, mostly because it kind of encompasses a lot of what we're talking about, where they responded to a threat which the government was not reacting to, and the insanity of the government basically not reacting to a human rights crisis.
Can you just, I kind of, that's a massive blind spot for me. Can you just unpack the Treatment Action Campaign?
The Treatment Action Campaign fought the government to recognize that HIV was a real problem and to take action and provide antiretrovirals.
Oh, yes.
So yeah, I mean, that in terms of getting government to recognize their role that they had to play, you know, to address a human rights crisis. And I think it's an incredibly powerful story. It's an incredibly motivating story just to see what civil society can accomplish. I mean, something that it was insanity what was going on. I mean, I think it was a little bit before our time of really being involved or realizing what was going on around us so much. But even then, I remember the insanity of all of it.
Yeah, and the insane thing was that Thabo Mbeki was guided, educated, groomed is the right word, to be president, to be the ANC's like flagship kind of response to the end of the Mandela era. And he did so well on so many points. He really did. And to fall astray on such a simple point, and it was completely ridiculous. But my point was actually that the civil pressure in that time around this issue eventually kicked him out of power.
Yeah, and I think one of the important things for me is we talked earlier about how important the rationality is in this whole topic, and how rational criticism of policy. And that was why the whole thing was so insane, is that the ANC government under Thabo Mbeki would not recognize the scientific evidence. They would not appreciate it because they just didn't want to believe it. They just didn't want to acknowledge it. It was all based on ridiculous concepts that they were holding on to.
What did they do, Rob? They doubled down
Exactly.
on facts that were rubbish.
Strange that the ANC would do something like that.
Strange that we still fucking see that today.
So yeah, I mean, I think what I'd like to just kind of emphasize is how important a moment that was in the history of South Africa as an open society.
Definitely.
And what it can accomplish is that when government is not responding to something like that, the citizens can hold government account. The citizens can make government account for these things, can make government take notice, can go out and talk about these things freely and raise awareness. That is an incredibly powerful concept.
And I would refer our listeners to a previous episode we've done on electoral reform, in which we came out on the idea that accountability does not stem from changing the electoral system. It stems from culture. And something like the Treatment Action Campaign manifests the culture of the citizenry acting to hold government to account.
Just to drive that home, that's not just talking about the culture in government, the culture that people in government hold. It's talking about the culture of civil society and the fact that we have to take up that fight.
Yeah.
I'd like to highlight a second example that worked. I mean, there are two more to my mind. There's an obvious one and a less obvious one. So Neil mentioned the second one, and he called it one of the greatest successes civil society has had, perhaps in the last decade or this century. Can anyone remember what it was?
I can remember.
Go.
But,
Well, of course you can. Mr. Park, Mr. Cass?
ETOLs.
Yeah, was it outer? I
It
was
was
going to say
outer.
outer.
Yeah.
So
I was going to guess the new nuclear.
We didn't air that
a great
episode.
example. Yeah, no, well done. So I mean, I don't think we need to recount the full history of the ETOL debacle, but the point is that a civil society group got up and pushed back. Now, interestingly for our listeners, I have an e-tag and pay my e-tolls and don't really have an issue doing so. Please, let's not go there. I could see 4 different people arming up for a bar fight here. Hackles rising. My point to contribute is this. What really inspires me is OUTA's subsequent change. So they were formed about ETOLs, and that fight was won. Then what did they do? They didn't roll over and say, they didn't go home and have a G&T and celebrate their success. They rebranded. I forget what OUTA stood for originally.
Organization Undoing Tax Abuse.
They changed it after
Yes.
ETOLs.
No,
was it always
was
that?
the opposition to
you're
urban
right.
tolling allowance.
You're
That's
right.
what it is.
You're right.
That's what it is.
No, you're right.
And then they said, let's become something new, and it is the Organization Undoing Tax Abuse. And just a quick taster of what they've done recently is they went through a piece of data issued by the Gauteng ANC on how 2.01 billion rand was spent on COVID relief efforts. And I have such a double-sided response here. One, I'm really proud of the Gauteng ANC that they issued this document. And every single person who's received money out of the economic response is listed there, the company, the contact details, the website, the address, etc. That's good. What's bad is that when OUTA went through this with a fine tooth comb, they cut it up like something in Kill Bill Volume 1. Over to you, Neil.
What I just wanted to say is in regard to your kind of the changing of OUTA into an organization that meant more than just about tolling. Another report that you guys sent to us, which we'll link in the show notes, the State of Civil Society Report 2020. In that, they mentioned that the biggest wins across the globe. This is not a South African report. This is a global report. Across the globe, many of the fights that were won in overturning government, in overturning ridiculous legislation in government, and they give a lot of examples there. Many of those fights did not roll over for small concessions on what they were hoping for. And here, obviously, something like Lebanon comes to mind as in recent memory. They didn't roll over. Even when they won the fight fully, they still remained active in the civil society space. And that's one of their main headings of the report, which is quite interesting.
So booyah. And second point out of that report that I think is so valuable to put on the table. That report's done every year, but for our listeners, it's been going for at least 9 years that I recall. It might be substantially longer. This year, the year of the pandemic, they identify that the amount of societies that are suffering, and I'm using my word repression, it's something like that, has gone from 17% to 40. Sorry, 19 to 40. It's more than doubled. And part of the reason for that is governments taking a more authoritarian stance in response to COVID. And there were words there that I can't get to now in my notes, but things like people were upset with governments for doubling down on stuff.
Well,
they make this point specifically. I wrote it down here that people were driven to protest by economic hardship and pressing financial concerns, and obviously that's much more exacerbated under the current crisis.
So one final point on OUTA, which I think ties in so nicely with what it means to live in an open society. I mean, OUTA has made themselves into something which it exists just to be a thorn in the side of government. That's its whole reason for existing.
I feel like going to sell hot dogs outside their offices. Seriously.
Why don't we just give them out for free?
So for beer. So if you think about that, they all they want to do is push back against government in any way they can. And does that not say a whole lot about how open a society this is? That they're able to do that. An organization is able to exist for years, to get stronger and stronger, just to give government a hard time.
And it's not tiny amounts of money that we're talking here. Tiny amounts of support, like pockets of involvement. That's not what we're talking here. OUTA is a huge organization with not big enough, but a massive budget to get the best lawyers to take the government to court. And we've seen that kind of time and time again with e-tolls and with all the stuff they've been involved with subsequently.
So I too wish to sing the praises of OUTA. I do, however, think that it's important we give our listeners their vision, not our version of their vision. Because I think if you ask Wayne Divinage, do you exist to be a thorn in the side of government? He'll say, I exist to make my country better.
I'm
but
not
here's
suggesting
what
that.
Here's
That's
what
what
he
I'm
says.
saying they do.
So I just want to come back on those words and say they're not there just to give government a hard time. They're there for the following. I quote, a prosperous country with an organized, engaged, and empowered civil society that ensures responsible use of tax revenues throughout all levels of government. Fucking hot dogs and beer for free at your office on Friday, sir.
Should we do it, eh?
I'm
Should we
keen.
go put up a Let's Talk flag and just make them hot dogs?
Those are our 67 minutes this week. Guys, the one other example of a massive open society win in this country is the obvious one. Is
Jay-Z.
getting Jacob Zuma to leave. And we don't necessarily have to unpack it, but we do just need to underline it. And I would propose we also underline the role there specifically of the media. The only point I would make is that civic society pushback lasted from, you could arguably say 2009 when he was elected as ANC president, until the February of 2018 that's 9 years, more or less, call it 8 years and change, when he was effectively thrown out. And I suppose December 2017 at Nasrek and Cyril's election was the point. So this stuff ain't easy. You got to keep your shoulder to the wheel and push for years. And booyah to the media and booyah to the civil society organizations who took him and the corrupt and just frankly inept organizations and people around and under him to court. And we've done previous episodes citing some of those court cases. And I just want to give another shout out to the media.
Andy, you're very quiet
Yeah,
there.
agreed.
Any thoughts for us?
Yeah, I think it's impressive that compared to other countries, we're kind of doing okay, and that there is room for these, civil society organizations and so on. But I also feel kind of disappointed because I feel like we could very easily go a whole lot further. Like with the treatment action campaign, it would have been nice if we could just know how much money the ANC was taking from big pharmaceuticals, right? That would have been and that's easy. They can pop it on their website. Just make it law.
But once again, the legislators are the people that they are trying to police.
Yeah, I suppose so. It's foxes watching the hen house and owning the farm.
I like that, Andrew.
Yeah, what are you going to do? So I feel like we could, it doesn't need to be so hard on these activists, actually. Make it easy. Make it so instead of having to apply for a freedom of information request, if someone in government wants to keep something secret, make them apply for a request. The whole thing could go a lot further, but I suppose they understand that to an extent in that, as you say, when one fight is won, they stay together and they move on to the next one. So I think that's a really important lesson. You have to keep going.
Isn't that gorgeous?
Yeah.
That these people, like you've mentioned, who are actually dissuaded from doing what they are setting out to do. They don't just win that fight, then they transform the organization and win the next fight. And I don't think for these people, it's not about winning the fight. It is about the fight. It is about the fact that until every person goes to school, no one can rest.
On that note, something to remember, and it's an important but quick line. A culture civically of open society, civil society pushback is a very powerful part of our South African heritage. That is how, between 1948 and 1994, we changed this country. That is one of the reasons we are not Israel and Palestine, is we come from a rich history of heroes and people who just got up and did the hard thing. And we can honor that as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's entirely fair on the Palestinians, but do go on.
Yeah,
So
a red wine discussion.
Something I'd like to bring up, and that is one of the criticisms that gets leveled against the open society, and that is that it doesn't allow for tradition. And I think it's got an interesting frame of reference in a country like South Africa, where we have a lot of really deeply held beliefs and cultural practices. And a big part of what the open society does is question those kinds of things. What it's required to do is question the applicability of these things. And I think, with a history like South Africa and Africa in general has of cultural practices being undermined and ridiculed, I think it's important to recognize that as, I don't want to call it a threat to the open society, but recognizing that there is a potential for criticism there. And I think it's worth talking about. How do we go about kind of balancing those two things?
Tradition versus what?
Well, where you have really deep-seated cultural practices and really people that are tied to beliefs. And then the idea of, a lot of people talk about how a lot of Western ideas around the way Western democracies function have just been like transplanted onto Africa without really understanding.
Imposed.
Yeah, imposed. And the thing, the whole history is a history of imposition. And,
exactly.
I think that there's a threat there of saying that the concept of the open society is threatened.
Is it in South Africa? So I get that from a kind of textbook academia philosophy point of view, and I can think of many examples where that would be the case. But thinking of our little speck of earth, to what degree does an open society threaten traditionalism in the SA context?
Well, I think to what? Sorry, what was your question? To which degree?
To what degree does an open society threaten traditionalism and culture?
Well, because
I'm not
you
suggesting-
can't because an open society doesn't support female circumcision. You understand?
Well,
so you'd have to.
doesn't it?
No.
An open
No, it
society
doesn't.
is
Hold
about
on, female
an open
female
society is about
circumcision.
freedom of choice.
Female circumcision is very different from male circumcision.
Okay, so
I get you, but let's just apply our.
Yeah, we can call it female genital mutilation.
There we go.
That avoids the
Guys, we sat here
euphemism.
less than an hour ago and we said that one of the hallmarks of an open society is that you are free to make your own choices even when they are to your own detriment.
Yes. Yeah, that's true, but you have to self-assess. I mean, the world at large says that cutting off a woman's clitoris is wrong. And like Andrew said, those are the words that I was looking for. Female genital mutilation. So yes, if you are 18 years old, as in of age, and you decide to do that to yourself, fine. But for an open society to work in general, there has to be the self-assessment of those traditions. Is there any point in doing that to a girl of 12 years old? Can she decide what is good for her and what is bad for her? No, her society decides. And her society decides that. Now that society actually needs to self-assess those traditions.
So I'm not suggesting that the open society threatens, for instance, things in South Africa. What I'm suggesting is the reverse.
Yes.
The fact that there are such deeply held cultural beliefs, that threatens the open society proliferating into that. And, I think there's a whole lot of other implications around that. How we present the idea of the open society is also, as we said, like everything that's been imposed on Africa over centuries, it's important in presenting the idea of the open society not as another one of those things. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, and not to kind of encroach on people's beliefs and whatever. And I'm all for that. But you know, if Nontle held all her traditional beliefs 100%, she would hold the ones that ties her social fabric to her land, which is what we heard about. But she would also hold the ones that says, my king rules over me forever and ever, and that's the end of the story. So there you see the kind of
assessment of one's values.
the assessment, the
Rational?
you decide on which of these things you're gonna carry forward. Sorry, I've lost my word.
And I think we should acknowledge, Rob, what you're getting at, that there is, in this country specifically, a conflict, balance, competition, choose your verb, between those two forces. And I'm hesitant, our listeners, Rob's caught me offside with this one. I haven't thought about this yet. I believe, I'm hesitant to talk about it because I believe it's more complicated than we can do justice now.
Yeah, I kind of think we should maybe cut this whole segment.
Let's stop it there. Let's keep that and stop it there.
Sorry, I shouldn't have brought it up.
No, don't be sorry.
Rational
I mean,
criticism. I think it's fine for us to say we don't know, to say that yes, this is difficult to say. We need a whole episode on this, but it's still valid to bring it up because, like, I mean, your first story about Mogoeng speaks to exactly that. How far does his tradition, his belief, encroach on us being able to have an open society?
And just, you know, I know we're putting a peg in it, but I feel this is an important thing to hang on the peg. I'm not sure I agree, and I'm not disagreeing. I'm not sure I agree that they are counterpoints to one another, traditionalism and an open society. I stand to be correct. You know, we got to think about this stuff.
There are some quotes about
Let's put the pin in that.
Right. Okay, guys, before we do closing thoughts, any last kind of things we want to put in the intellectual pot to boil?
I found it quite interesting, the Popper's paper, that he talks about the Weimar Republic's tolerance towards the Nazis. I found that quite interesting, and I'm going to quote this, and we can cut it out if we want or whatever.
No, but it's a powerful point.
It is, and he says that, from the paper that we'll link, unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed, and tolerance with them. In this formulation, I do not imply, for instance, that we should always suppress the utterance of intolerant philosophies, as long as we can counter them by rational argument and keep them in check by public opinion. Suppression would certainly be most unwise. But we should claim the right to suppress them if necessary, even by force, for it may easily turn out that they are not prepared to meet us on the level of rational argument, but begin by denouncing all argument. They may forbid their followers to listen to rational argument because it is deceptive, and teach them to answer arguments by the use of their fists or pistols. We should therefore claim, in the name of tolerance, the right not to tolerate the intolerant. We should claim that any movement preaching intolerance places itself outside the law, and we should consider incitement to intolerance and persecution as criminal, in the same way we should consider incitement to murder or to kidnapping or to the revival of the slave trade as criminal. And I just want to mention Donald Trump, because that is that. That is what is occurring there.
Something else there that you've noted is what happened with Trump's election in this example is that the public opinion that is mentioned in that quote was not rational, and there was not rational debate. And Popper's point is, if a bunch of people can talk about this rationally, you will have a tolerant outcome. But people are flawed, and societies as herds are flawed.
And his point is that if we allow the intolerant, that is the death of tolerance. Yeah. And that is exactly what we have seen in Trump's America.
And I would then bring it back to SA to say that here the degree of tolerance for those who disagree with us, and I will point to Nklan NDZ and Becky Hele and others. There are ministers in government who are really upset with the public for saying all sorts of negative things about them and taking them on and taking them to court. but they remain tolerant. They allow us to push back.
It's just interesting for like such a philosophical idea, you know. It's very easy for people to be all unicorns and rainbows, but this guy recognizes the fact that you can't fight intolerance with tolerance, and I just felt that was a valuable thing to mention.
I like it.
So one of the other things I'd like to talk about, and it kind of leads us to a little bit of a closing point, I guess, is the idea that a big part of the open society is who gets to drive the narrative. And I think it's something I feel like we keep coming to in a lot of these discussions that we have. And the reason I started thinking about it, I was listening to an interview the other day with, I think it was the Minister of Communications or some kind of equivalent of that of Zimbabwe. And it was really interesting to hear him talk because he was able to drive a narrative that said, no, well, there's nothing untoward going on in Zimbabwe. There's no human rights abuses. We're not locking people up for speaking out against the government. These people have incited violence according to our laws, and that's why we've taken action against them. And he got to control that narrative. And I just thought how powerful a thing that is, and how that largely kind of defines an open society versus a closed society. And what I want to express is that for me, the narrative of a country should be an aggregation of the views of every different person in that country. So a whole bunch of independent views that get aggregated to an idea of what that country is. And I think if you look at a closed society, the narrative of that country is the government narrative, not the people narrative.
Yes.
And I think that's a really powerful concept in talking about the open society and what it means.
Yeah, and it's always interesting because you have so many kind of differing views. You know, in South Africa, you have everything from ANN to Daily Maverick. In the States, you have everything from Russia Today to CNN to Fox News. And all of those kind of outlets are trying to drive a certain narrative. But to your point, only some of those are the government narrative. The rest of them are dissenting narratives. And I think it's really powerful when you talk about protest, especially because often protests, especially the recent ones in the US, are kind of painted as they're these like vagabonds that are just burning like places. And people accept that narrative, you know. People accept the kind of what is it? The Antifa is a terrorist organization kind of narrative pretty easily. So you also just need to like kind of assess that, you know.
Again, depending on which narrative you read. So I make a point, Neil knows this, but for our listeners, of reading the New York Times every day and the Washington Post some days, and then Fox effing News. and I do it for the narrative point. And what's interesting about US protests is, to Fox, they are all Antifa. The Washington Post kind of has varying views and so forth. And the New York Times stresses repeatedly in various articles that they are 90% of the time peaceful. And I suspect they are not 90% of the time peaceful. It's a lower number than that. But they're also not completely Antifa. And so you read both sides of the narrative to get somewhere close to the truth, because no one narrative is the truth.
But well, I can state that without fear in my heart that Antifa is not a terrorist organization. Antifa is one of the, and that's another narrative that has been. No. But
Guys,
it's another narrative.
I think we're getting off the point
Oh,
here.
okay, your point, Rob, was.
Sorry.
Gavel.
Gavel. Okay, gavel's coming out. So we're getting off the point here. You're kind of actually you're explaining the point in too much detail.
Yeah.
I think we've all agreed that.
Okay.
Control the narrative.
Cool.
Either the country controls
Rob's
the
controlling the fucking narrative with that.
I control the narrative, yeah. This is my country.
We, the people,
This is your
have
country.
given...
I declare this my own sovereign state.
No.
And you
Bad
will
example.
listen to me.
Bad example for our listeners. We, the people, have empowered you with the gavel to hold us to the values we wanted, which is not to fuck around on long tangents.
And we did that because we can trust Rob as an independent person.
And if we don't, we can fire him.
Yes.
We have the freedom.
Yeah.
All right.
No, you can't fire me, but you can vote me out.
Touche. All right. I would propose, my esteemed colleagues, that we look to closing thoughts on this matter. Happy with that?
So I think, like Neil had in his morning rant, I get incredibly frustrated in South Africa. And I think everyone does. The fact that we feel like people not being held to account. We feel like there is no recourse. We feel like there's all this madness going on around us, and it gets overwhelming. But when you look at what we do have, we are very fortunate in that we are still in a position where we can talk freely. We are still in a position where there are courses we can take, or routes we can take to hold the government to account. And we've spoken a lot about it in previous episodes and in this episode. And as much as it feels frustrating that things are not happening and we don't feel like the government responds to what we want, we're a damn sight better off, as Johannes said in those stats. I mean, we're in the top 17% of people who are allowed to do the things that we're allowed to do. That's not something to be taken for granted. That's not something everyone gets. And that, I think, is something that we should always keep in mind.
Mr. Park?
Yeah, I think my take-home point is that open is relative, and we always need to keep pushing forward. You know, no matter how we compare to other societies, humans in general need to push for more and more openness and more democracy, and it's an ongoing journey.
I think I'm warming to the idea of living for the fight.
I think you were born for the fight, brother. I would close off by repeating two things I've said before. The first is Justice Cameron again. The Constitution itself cannot save us. What can? Listen to his description of these people. Proud, deeply skeptical population are his words. One can be deeply skeptical of one's country and one's government and the level of openness in its society, as we are, and be proud of what we have.
Be patriotic, exactly.
You can be a skeptical patriot.
Well done, Joe. Well done, Rob.
Very good.
Thank you.
Let's hit tidbits. You know what I think we need, guys? I think this episode would be incomplete without circling back to something about beer. Rob, have you got something about beer?
Well, I
for
mean,
us?
if you assess the comments on our channels, the most like what is it when you're like the most dissenting thing that we've said is that IPA is the best beer.
Controversial, huh? Shots
Fortunately
fired.
for you guys,
Yeah, unbelievable. People are. Craig Greer he's an ale man apparently, Rob. So I don't know if you can talk to that.
I'll have to go and look into this. Maybe I've got a fight on my hands. I'm an ale man as well. An IPA is ale.
Get to the point.
Anyway, okay, here's a fun story about beer, because it seems like that's my thing now. So I came across the story, which I thought was pretty hilarious, and it has a wider kind of lesson in it, which I think is nice. So a brewery in Canada called Hell's Basement brewed a beer which they named using the Maori word huru huru, which supposedly means feather. The reason they call it that is because they used New Zealand hops in this beer and produced a really light pale ale. So they wanted to call it light like a feather, making the reference.
That makes sense.
But the word huru huru colloquially means pubic hair.
In Canada.
No, it's a Maori word. So
the Maori.
colloquially, so they called their beer basically pubic hair. And I think it's a beautiful lesson not to try and take other languages and try and be cool about it. Stick with what you know. Stick with your own language. Because there's a bunch of instances where this kind of stuff happens, and it's just embarrassing.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It says a lot.
There was one thing. A company launched in Japan. This is a famous marketing example. An American company launched in Japan in the 80s, and they, I think they were doing travel insurance or cars, or I think it was cars. And they said a Nissan, a Ford, or whatever will take you from slope to slope. Obviously, kind of indicating that you can go from ski slopes in Japan to the beach with a Nissan or a Ford or whatever. But obviously, slopey eyes is a massive insult to the Japanese. So it was a massive marketing blunder. Yeah, but it happens all the time.
Any other light-hearted tidbits? I've got a heavy but poetic one.
Take us away.
Okay. I will, esteemed listeners, at some point tell you about the South African haka. That will not be tonight.
I mean, you keep threatening, dude.
I would have gone with teasing, but okay.
Except I keep editing it out, so the audience never gets the tease. It's just us.
Esteemed audience, I have been threatening and teasing this since the beginning, but Neil is repressing me. Anyway, what I do quickly want to put on the agenda for our listeners as a tidbit is become a Daily Maverick insider. You load your credit card details, it's $150 a month, it gets auto-debited, and you get $100 back in Uber vouchers that you can use for Uber Eats if you want. They now deliver alcohol. And the reason I say that is this. In 2008, the editor of the Daily Maverick 2018, the editors of the Daily Maverick had a problem. They couldn't pay the bills. They were faced with the fundamental question of how do we solve that. They got expert opinion, not only from SA, but around the globe, that said, put up a paywall. You do great content. The Washington Post does it, the New York Times does it. You can make this work. They said, we cannot put up a paywall. It is at odds with our value proposition. It is at odds with what we do. And what we do is we empower South Africa through quality journalism. So then they took a gamble and they said, let's ask people to pay us even though it's free.
To donate.
And the question...
that's the Radiohead model.
Yeah. And then they said, who's going to pay us for a free service? Well, guess what? 13,000 people do. It covers 40% of their payroll, and it means that they continue to give us quality independent journalism. They say, SA is a poor country, and without access to quality journalism, it will become irretrievably poorer. So, you don't need me to tell you to do it. Take their words. I quote, in the last 12 months, the impact of our work and the groundbreaking investigations by our investigative arm, Scorpio, helped in the Gupta brothers and Salim Essa being sanctioned under the Magnitsky Act, 9 people being arrested in relation to the VBS bank looting and exposure of PPE fraud at the highest levels. This is the work Maverick insiders are paying for. When a journalist's job is lost, I put this one in here for you, Neil. When a journalist's job is lost, it leaves a vacuum that is filled by the Karens from Facebook and the Kevins from Twitter.
They said that on their site.
Who spout sometimes insane opinions as facts on subjects that nobody but the experts should really comment on.
That was written by Richard Poplack, Joe. I hope you know.
Where our journalists interrogate, our members collaborate. When we show the worst of our country and its leaders, our readers show us the best in active citizenship. So the good news story isn't only that Maverick Insider is growing and helping us become sustainable. It is that there are nearly 13,000 South Africans out there who will pay for something that's free, so that those who can't afford to pay for it can still read it. Faith in humanity restored. Close quote.
And I think that's a very valuable point, and we want to make a difference. The fortunate of us, I'm looking around the room, we want to make a difference, but we will no longer stand for your bullshit. We will no longer stand for the things that's carrying on in government, and I think that's a massive plug. Daily Maverick should be paying us, and I think they're
in beer and hot dogs. We'll take them straight to Outer.
Yeah, we're redistributing wealth. Yeah, but I think they have just made their 13,001th subscriber.
Booyah!
Yeah, you owe them that money, right? You think about it. I mean, Gupta leaks.
Yeah, and I mean, it's worth mentioning that a massive part of that thing was done by money that they kind of borrowed, that was given to them to put all of those journalists into a room and go, okay, here is 100,000 pages of documents.
Do you know who cut the check? I was going to tell the story and we never got there. The 2 people who gave the hard drives to Daily Maverick sat in a hotel in Cape Town and said to the Scorpio Amabungane team, we need $1 million each to disappear. We don't need it to be rich. We don't want to, buy things on yachts and boats and so on. These people are a global crime network. They will find us and kill our families.
Yeah.
And then a bunch of journalists had to go find $1 million. $1 million each. The check was cut. by the Open Society Foundation of South Africa.
No ways. The George Soros.
Funded by
No
George
ways.
Soros.
No ways.
That is not a fact in evidence. It is a story taken as fact that I hear in the corridors of journalist power.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been subscribing a Daily Maverick Insider for at least a year, possibly a bit longer. No, don't do that. Don't do that. Please. But the way I looked at it, and just a little bit of insight from my perspective, when they started doing it, I looked at the proposition, and 150 rand a month is very little, because that is my news source. That's where I go to read most of my news, or more for the long form journalism. I really enjoy what the product they put out, and so from one aspect, I feel it's a product worth paying for. But secondly, if you look at it as an investment in the country, and that's the way I approached it. And at the same time, I started contributing to Outer as well, which I've also been doing for a while. And exactly that. It's a very small amount of money, realistically, on a monthly basis. And I think what you get back in return from that is the ability to feel in some small way that you're contributing something positive to the country.
Absolutely.
But you're also giving them the security of that money, so that they can plan what they're doing. They can bank on Rob's money coming in more or less every month, unless a catastrophe happens, and that gives them the ability to kind of reach further. And there are massive like examples of this. The Large Hadron Collider was built like that by 0.1% of all European countries' GDP every year. They plan 15 years in advance, and they build the biggest machine the world has ever seen. I mean, that's how change happens.
But it's very interesting because, I mean, News 24 recently put up a paywall on their site, and it's
wanted
been
to
very
mention this.
interesting to see how upset it's made people, where people feel like news should be free.
And frankly, that's the
But
problem.
they built the model. They built the model that it was free. So
exactly.
And
I don't blame the journalist. I blame the consumer. They consume, because every one of those consumers who's bitching about News 24 being hang on, who's bitching about News 24 being too expensive, went out this week and bought beer, and if they smoke cigarettes.
And I mean, their
you're welcome to
proposition
buy beer
is
and
so
cigarettes,
cheap,
but-
really, for if you think what it costs to do what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly, because it's all humans, actual people, like going through dead ends, driving into arbitrary parking lots. I mean,
Going through thousands of emails and
it's just been
spreadsheets
really
and
pretty
attachments.
hilarious for me hearing people's arguments on it, where they go, I used to read News 24, but I will not pay for crappy journalism. You're like, but you were reading it before.
yeah,
It
you
wasn't-
were just reading crappy journalism before.
you were happy when you weren't paying for it. You didn't think it was crappy journalism then.
No, then it was my best
Logic
source.
fallacy.
Yeah.
On that note, guys, I propose we bring affairs to a close.
Well,
Alrighty.
that is all from us. Thank you to my colleagues, Mr. Rob Cass, Mr. Janus Landman, Mr. Andrew Park, and our technician and producer and general Zen guy, Sois.
Hold on. Sois, what's your Pokemon character?
Dragapult.
My man.
Oh my gosh, we're gonna post a link to the Dragapult page, because even as a Pokemon kind of aficionado, a Pokemon knower, I don't know that one.
It's the drag queen Pokemon.
No. No.
Yes,
We are editing
RuPaul
that out.
forever.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we are now bringing the show to a close.
Good night.